he would get it. Bob, it was interesting because Bob couldn't speak a word of their common language, but he just spoke American. Because every day he loved to watch TV and he would watch those cartoons and he spoke English with a strong American accent. It was great. But Bob always knew exactly what he wanted. And when he came, just as we were finishing eating, he came up to his mom and he said, "Mom, I'm hungry." And here across this concrete table, there was so much food that they had brought with them. I was so happy because I was just sitting there pulling it back, eating it. It was great. All the mangoes, all the bananas. And then this boy came up and he said, "Yeah, Mom, I'm hungry." So she gives him a big plate. And so Bob says, "Oh, thanks." So he walked up to the table. Let's imagine there's a big plate across here. And when he walks up, for a boy that was about 6 years old, he walks up with this big plate in his hands and he looks across the first stages of the table and he sees the mangoes and he's like, "Oh, I don't like that." You can just see on his face that he really does not want any of what's on the table. He quickly moves across the table and he sees some more fruits. Some more rice there. Oh, he doesn't want it. It was so interesting because at one point he was even picking it up and sniffing it and he just put it back in the bowl. It was very interesting because it was just me standing there. His mother was doing something else as he was picking out his food, so he didn't really get in trouble. Came to the very end of the table, held his plate there again, and he's like, oh, he really was not interested in anything that was on the table. It's interesting because later that day he cleaned up a lot of the stuff as we were on the way back on the boat, and he ate a lot of it just before he fell asleep. But at that very moment, for a boy that was so hungry, he looked across at this table and he decided that he didn't want to eat any of it. So he then turned to his mom and said, "Oh, you know what? I'm not hungry." So he gave her the plate and he walked back and went back to swim. The point is that we must know exactly what we want, just like this boy. It's not only saying, "Yeah, I definitely want that," but it's also saying, "I definitely do not want that." Just like this boy, he knew what he didn't need and he knew what he needed. When it comes to our hope, we have a choice to choose to hope in the Lord or to hope in something else. Not just to say, "Oh Lord, I will put 90% of my trust in you and another 10 in something else." Let us completely hope in the Lord, where we not only watch and we're looking at how He's moving and working and living in our lives, but also wanting and desiring His will for our lives. Desiring to be in the very place where He wants us to be. Desiring the hope that He has in store for us. This is not a hope just for me. This is a hope for every single one of us here at Henderson. And so this is something we can be happy with today because it is a hope that we can also want. We can also want. The third and final principle comes after that great verse that we found in Lamentations 3 and verse 24, verse 24, where he said, "The Lord is my portion." And finally in verse 25 and 26, he hits the climax of what it means to hope in the Lord. This is how we can get hope, remember. And so from Lamentations chapter 3, verse 25 and 26, I'll read finally from here. Verse 25 and 26. "The Lord is good to those who wait for Him. To the soul who seeks Him, it is good that one should hope and wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." Did you hear a word that was repeated twice within these two verses, beginning with W again? Four-letter word. Wait. That's you can see it on the screen. That's exactly right. After we watch at how the Lord is working, after we want to hope in Him, we finally have the great but almost so difficult task is to wait for this hope that we have in the Lord. To wait. Remember, like we have been talking about, this was just before the fall of Jerusalem. And for the time when they are soon going to be taken away to a strange and foreign land, it's not just about waiting for a bus that you know is going to come soon to take you to your destination. It's about waiting for something that almost seems impossible because of the circumstances around you. When they were taken to Babylon, every ounce of their goodness that they had with them before was taken away. But when you choose to hope in the Lord, you choose to hope of the impossibility that God can make possible in your life. Something that seems so difficult, He can do it in the click of a finger, in the twinkling of an eye, because this is the great God that we choose to serve. To not only watch, to not only want, but to finally to wait. To wait. Turn to a different neighbor now and say, "What are you waiting for?" Please ask them, what are you waiting for? Many will say today, oh, they find themselves waiting in vain for things. But this is a hope that we have in the Lord. And hope is not something that might possibly happen, remember. Hope is something that will definitely happen. The verse says to hope and quietly wait for the salvation of God, for the deliverance, for the freedom that will come from the Lord. To hope and to wait for Him. To wait for Him. Come with me back just a few books to Isaiah chapter 17. Chapter 8, sorry. Isaiah chapter 8. Just before the start. And this is just before he gives that great prophecy of the coming of Jesus. For unto us a child is born, in chapter 9. But Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 17. This is he, Isaiah, giving us that same waiting principle. And he makes that choice in verse 17. And he says, I will wait upon the Lord that hideth his face from the house of Jacob. I will look for him. Often they speak of the Lord whose wrath has been poured out to his people because they have chosen to turn away from him. And so like he's describing the Lord as someone who has hidden his face from the house of Jacob. He still chooses to wait upon the Lord. You see, the difficulty of the task is that for this year and for every glorious moment and every blessing that the Lord will shower upon us, we have a choice to either wait for him or to hope in something else. And I pray that as a church and as a community, as a body of Christ, we will choose to only wait for the Lord. And that when any antichrist or someone else comes before us and says, hey, come along with me, we know who we are waiting for. We know exactly what hope we trust and are believing in. It is the hope that is the anchor of our soul, as it's written in Hebrews. And it is the hope that will lead us all the way through. I'll ask the children, boys and girls, have you ever waited for something before? Have you ever had to wait for something? How about you? Yeah? What have you had to wait for before? You don't know? You've forgotten? Often we find ourselves waiting for our parents. Or sometimes it's our parents waiting for their children. Often we find ourselves waiting for something that you just almost, because of everything around you, almost can see that it's not going to happen. Brothers and sisters, if there is something that you are struggling with, or even you know of someone else, and you know that the Lord can come through them, rest assured that we too can wait upon the Lord. Because when we do, as it says later in Isaiah, He will renew our strength, and we will mount up on wings like eagles. But first, after we watch, and after we want, we must also wait. Wait very patiently. The heart of hope is patience. The very character that we need for hope is patience. But the testing of our faith works patience. And it tries our faith. But when it comes to, we will only wait upon the Lord. And so, for the three principles that we can uphold for this year, when it comes to gaining and reclaiming this hope, especially when the times get hard, brothers and sisters at Henderson, what do we need to do? Firstly, we can, with our eyes, we can watch. Secondly, we can want and make a choice and a desire to trust in the hope of the Lord. And finally, we can wait. We can wait. I like what our pastor once said. He said, sometimes when you make a prayer and a question for the Lord, He will give you one of three answers. Often, He will say yes. Rarely, He will say no. And then, especially when you don't expect it, He will sometimes say, wait. He will sometimes say, wait. But the great thing is that we are not waiting for something that might just happen. We are waiting for the blessed, for the living hope that is most surely coming to pass, because He has promised it in His Word. As we bring things to a close, I'd like to remind us all of a great text just before the second coming is pictured in 1 Thessalonians in chapter 4. And let's turn there, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, as we bring things to a close. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 13. And he's talking about people who live with a hope, just like us. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 13. But I would not have you to be ignorant. I would not have you to not understand, he says. Brothers and sisters, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. He would have us that we won't sorrow as others who have no hope, but that we will live as people with hope. I would like to ask you, how so far in your journey with the Lord, how so far, even in this past week, has hope been clear in your life? I'm not sending out the condemnation. It's simply something for us to examine in ourselves. How much is hope clear in the way that you live your life? One of my favorite stories, apart from the story of redemption, that I've read of and that always touches because it teaches me a lot, is the story of two men who found themselves in a long life of prison. Two men who were in there for different reasons. One was innocent, but he was given the sentence for life. He came in when he was middle-aged. Another man who was guilty because he had committed murder at a very young age. Now, for one of them, there was a man who was only just recently come in. He'd been in for maybe 10 or 20 years. There was another man who'd been in prison for 40, 50 years. They were both in prison for life. But there was one thing that separated them. And that thing was hope. It was hope. They became very, very close friends. But for the man who was innocent, for the man who desired to get free, once they were sitting on the dinner table, and as they sat there eating their food, he looked over and said to the man, "I wonder what it'll be like when we get out of here." The man who'd been in there for 40 decades turned to him and said, "What did you say?" And then the other man turned up and said, "Yeah, think about it. Don't you ever hope or dream what it'll be like when we get out of here and go back to civilization?" The other man turned to him and said, "Don't talk like that. Hope is dangerous." He said, "Hope can kill a man." The other man looked at him and said to him, "I'm sorry, brother, but you're wrong. Hope is what's going to get me free." It's a great story that talks about the difference between freedom and bondage. Perhaps you've heard of it. Another man, and in the end, this man stood up and left the table because he was so angry that this man tried to talk to him about hope. The man who was angry, you see, he had almost given up on life. Every time he would go for probation, they would reject him. But the other man who was innocent, he never let go of the hope of getting free. The hope that was coming soon in the future. Every time he went about his business in the day, he made a plan to get free. And in the end, he did. But the difference is how they chose to live their lives. How they chose to see things. Maybe as a man of hope, or either as a man of hopelessness. How about you here this morning or this afternoon? Will you choose to live your life in hope for the Lord? Or will you choose to live your life in doubt or in stress or in anxiety? It is my prayer that as we remember that we can watch, that we can want, that we can wait on the Lord, that we will make no greater choice but to hope in the Lord, who is our hope, who is our solid rock. And remember that the hope is not just a hope that's far away, but as he tells us in Colossians 1, it's a hope that lives inside of us, where he says how God will to make known what is the mystery to the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Make him your blessed hope, make him your blessed assurance. Share it with others and uphold it in your life so that we will live for this hope now and until he comes. Amen.